Hi, everybody. If you're just jumping on, we're going to give everybody a few minutes to get on. So we will start in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Looks like we've got a few people still trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're really excited to be having this webinar. We've heard from the field, from our sales team, from our growers that a lot of vegetable growers are interested in adding cut flowers to their lineup. So Michael, he's our Ornamentals Product Manager. He's a cut flower grower as well. We'll be talking a little bit about if you are growing vegetables, if you're totally new to cut flowers on the commercial side, what you need to do to get started, and some basic tips for you. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees, your videos are off and you are muted. If you have any questions, if you want to ask Michael questions during the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar. That will allow us to answer live, to type answers back to you so that everybody else can see the responses. So please use the Q&A feature if you have any questions about what Michael's talking about. And lastly, this webinar is going to be recorded. We're recording it right now. We will post this to the Harris Seeds YouTube channel later this week, and you should also get an email from us with the webinar recording. So we've got a couple of polls to start off with. Just to learn a little bit more about who we have here and make sure that our presentation is tailored to you guys. So we will launch the first poll. Take a minute to answer this question. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results. Take one more second. And it looks like the majority of people on here are growing some cut flowers, but not a ton. A couple people who are not growing cut flowers at all, and a few who are growing quite a few. So that is fantastic. And then our next poll is, we're curious kind of what your interest is in growing cut flowers. So take a minute, go ahead and submit your answers. On this one, I believe you can select as many as you would like.
Awesome. And while this is going, as Kendall said, I'm Michael Wells, Ornamentals Product Manager here. So I do have a background in growing cut flowers. I had a cut flower farm for 5 seasons, and then always dabbled in and out when I didn't have that as well. That was before I came back to Harris to work. With that, it was a specialty cut flower farm, so I won't go into that much detail in today's presentation. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is, again, specific to adding cut flowers to your vegetable production or to your agritourism sites, farm stand.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and share these results. Looks like quite a few of you are looking to sell pre-made bouquets, also a lot to sell U-cuts and then to add beauty to your farm. So thank you all so much. Without further ado, take it away, Michael.
Okay, so based on, let's get started. So why do you want to cut flowers on your farm? Many of you just answered that. Again, I'm going to start with the basics. We're not going to dive into people who are going to be selling to florists and even some of these markets. We're going to start with the basic items, but starting with these basics can move you on to if you're selling into farmers markets and you want to do these pre-made bouquets. As we go out the presentation, I'll give you some tidbits on the different production, as well as what goes into making bouquets potentially. As that was one of the top picks, the big thing to keep in mind as we go through making pre-made bouquets, it is time consuming. There is a design piece to it. You can make basic bouquets, and really the people who are getting into pre-made bouquets that are more what you would think of when you see at a florist are going to be your specialty cut flower farmers. So keep in mind on that as we go through the presentation, but we'll touch a bit on each of these markets as we go.
Michael, sorry to interrupt. We're getting a little bit of feedback that you're a little challenging to hear. Could you speak up just a bit?
Yes, is that any better?
Please, if you guys are unable to hear, please keep sending us messages and we'll do what we can to get the volume up for everyone.
Second, I'm going to make sure it's up all the way. Okay, and I turned up my mic a little bit too, so hopefully that will help as well.
That sounds much better on my end.
Okay.
Yes, much better. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so the main flowers we're going to be talking about today are sunflowers, zinnias, and amaranthus. I did throw gladiolas in here. I'm not going to dive too deep into those, but it's another crop that many vegetable farmers do add on for production purposes. The reason we're going to talk about these main three, sunflowers, zinnias, and amaranthus, they're all items that fit right in your regular production with direct sow items. So if you're growing sweet corn, you're growing pumpkins, any of the cucurbits, a lot of that is all direct sown in the field, and that's what we want to showcase for you today. So talking sunflowers. Okay, so we've got pollen-free versus items that are with pollen. So modern sunflowers are bred to be male sterile or pollen-free, as we refer to it. This extends the vase life. It keeps tabletops clean, so you won't have customers complaining about their pretty white tablecloth getting pollen on it. Many of those, the pollen-free items are going to be more expensive. They tend to be hybrids and just are at a higher price point. So those may not be items you want to take a look at. If you're just starting out, I definitely recommend looking at the pollen types. They're less expensive. You're going to be able to do a larger production of those at less of a cost. So those are good ones to start off with. Still will produce a great cut flower. Again, they will drop some pollen, but for the cases that we're working with, as far as for farm stands, roadside, and U-cuts, not quite at the same level as the florist quality. Again, in future presentations, we can talk about higher level of production and quality and hitting that floral trade quality. Next, we will talk about single stem versus branching. So single stem varieties are varieties that literally produce one bloom. So those are a lot more programmable, where the branching types, you're going to get multiple branches off each plant. There is a little bit difference in planting those. The single stems you're going to plant is close to 6 inches. Some people will do 4 inches to get that smaller head. The branching types are going to be spread out a little more, 9 to 12 inches. Sorry, I said that wrong. We're going to skip to the next page so you can see that. So the branching are going to be further spacing, but will produce more stems per plant. Again, we've got a huge offering, so we're going to go through right now some of the stuff that's going to be more cost effective for you adding into your farm. So the branching varieties, again, these will be spaced further apart. Ideally, if you go in and you pinch them at about 12 inches tall, you're going to get great stem length out of all the branches. Many newer growers will not go in and do that. You still will get multiple branches off of each plant, but they won't necessarily be as long of a stem, which could work for your marketplace. I'm here just showcasing some of our some of our varieties. So these are branching varieties that do contain pollen. Again, these will be the more cost-effective items. We've got the Autumn Beauty mix here that is showcased. One of our more popular mixes. It is stunning, delicious colors. I really enjoy that one. Next, we've got the Evening Sun. This is also a great color. The mix is more into one color palette, so you don't have the bronze, the red, and yellow in separate blooms. It's all one bloom type. Very nice. The Goldie Double, this is a unique bloom. You're getting these really large flower heads, semi-double, and they're fascinating because when you harvest them, and we'll talk further about that later on, the bloom kind of changes throughout the process. So it looks very different from the beginning harvest stage to when they're actually done blooming and the petals just keep kind of wrapping around. Pretty cool, neat variety. Ring of Fire. Bicolors are really popular in the fall, especially. This is a great holding one. Soraya, this is an All America Selections winner, which means throughout the country, different growers and breeders have judged this and have recommended it across the country as an amazing producer for gardens, but it's also great for cuts. These kind of stand out. They're a very unique looking bloom. They're very sturdy looking, heavy foliage. Really cool. Valentine is going to be more your unique color, that pale lemon yellow. Somehow I duplicated, my apologies.
Michael, we're getting a couple questions about pinching. What do you mean when you say pinching? How do you pinch? I don't know if you want to go into this now or at the end.
Will you remind me when we get to the planting section, please?
I will.
Thank you. And we do have one single stem variety in here that I did not mention, the Teo. Here, and that, so this does contain pollen. Again, we don't have a lot of the single stem varieties that contain the pollen. Most of them are pollen free, which means they're at a higher price level. This is going to be more your classic look, the yellow, not quite the deep orange, but the yellow color with the dark center. So most of those that we just talked about would be great for U-cut. They're going to be great for display purposes, making bouquets, or just selling bunches of sunflowers. These are going to be more if you want huge displays, like an acre of sunflowers or just a field of sunflowers, or you want a place where people can come and shoot their Instagram photos, which is really popular. There's many vegetable farms that have made that a piece of their business where they have special sunflower days where they're open and people come and just cut a sunflower or two and get photos out in the sunflower field. So pretty cool agritourism opportunity for you. But with these, so these are the tall hedge types here at the top. American Giant is what I have pictured. I did showcase some pricing on these just so people can see the difference because these are the ones you would be planting in mass, generally speaking. You can do small of them as well, but they just tend to be the cheaper varieties, so people will look at these to fill large spaces. American Giant, again, is this pictured one. So this can be 8 to 15 foot tall. You're gonna get the large 12-inch heads. These, along with the Mammoth and Titan, these are ones that some people will actually use. They will dry them and then sell them at the end of the season just as like a natural bird feeder because they're covered in huge seeds. A fun little add-on to your farm market. I'm gonna So mammoth here. Again, so this is another tall one, 8 to 10 foot tall, that 12-inch or larger bloom on those. I did showcase, this is sold in weight, so I did showcase the seed count and price point here, again, for large productions of it. This is our most popular one right now, as far as for large displays. People just enjoy it because they're giant, they're magnificent looking. Next, we've got the Titan. Similar to American Giants, more 12 to 14 foot height, but this one gets a gigantic head. So more like 24 inches across the head versus 12 inches. So really large. This one has quite large seeds as well, which are great for eating. So again, they fit into that marketplace if you want to add a little add-on at the market of just a head of a sunflower head with seeds for people to put out for the birds or to have fun and harvest them themselves for snacks. Next, we've got a black oil type called Paradovic. So this is new to us this season. We've had a lot of interest from our veggie farmers, especially wanting something inexpensive to fill a large space. This would be my go-to. So this is in the 5 to 6 foot height, which is what most people would be looking for. Depending on where you're located, they may be taller, but kind of in that range. These you're looking at spacing, you want to do 6 to 12 inches apart. I did put the 11,000 seeds per pound in here. And again, I did showcase what a per K, which is per 1,000. Sometimes those seed companies like to, we all use a little bit different. Sometimes you'll see M or K, which is for 1,000. So if you see those, it's per 1,000 seeds. Both the Paradovic and the Mammoth are sold in weight, so that's why the breakdown's here. But the Paradovic, again, filling large spaces, but really the people who want to do sunflower mazes, this is the variety that's going to be for them. So definitely take a look at that one if you just want a nice display. This is a fun one. This will not necessarily be for everybody. It is a unique sunflower in the fact that it will produce from like early summer all the way to frost. So the picture on the right is actually right from our site here. That we planted out the end of May as started plants. I want to say they were like in a 4-inch pot at that point when we planted them out. And they produced, this image was probably taken, I would say, beginning of September. So you're looking at 4 to 5 foot, or it's taller by the end of the season. But we have growers saying they're getting up to 40 stems off of these. Some people getting even more than that, depending on location. So it does contain pollen, so not pollen free. It's not at that florist quality. But if you're looking for something, again, to hit that Instagram market where you just put in 10 of these and they're huge. They're huge plants. So you can plant them. I've got 15 inches here. You can plant them up to 24 inches apart and they will fill in the space. You can also pinch them, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, to extend that and make them even larger. It just helps the branching get out. So again, these are branching. They do contain pollen. They are quite expensive because they're a unique variety. They're actually meant for the bedding plant trade because they're programmable in a pot to hold really well. And then once they get out in the garden, they just flourish and get gigantic. But I'm recommending them to vegetable farmers and specialty flower growers, or anybody who has people coming out to their farm to take a look at product. So definitely take a look at these. Again, you only need a few of them. We have direct sown them and had good luck. This is one because of the price point, I would recommend starting in pots and maybe starting a little early to give you a little head start. So you won't treat this just like the rest of the sunflowers we talked about today. It's very different. it almost in some respects we'll treat it more like how we would talk about zinnias. One second. Okay, so now we have the next round of sunflowers I'll talk to you about are the branching varieties. So these are pollen free, so they're going to be a little more expensive than the sunflowers that contain pollen. Sorry, these are a little out of order. My apologies, my images are out of order. Here is the Rouge Royale. So this was formerly known as the Moulin Rouge. This is a hybrid version. There are some open pollinated versions out in the market, which mean that won't necessarily be as consistent. With the nice dark blooms, you might get more variation in them. Is unfortunately a crop failure for this season, but I still wanted to show it to you because it is quite popular. And we do expect to have a good allotment of seed for next season. This is that, it gives you that nice chocolate color. Again, this is more ideal for the fall timing. This is Chocolat, another darker colored, great for the fall. Starburst Panache, nice semi-double blooms. So I'll walk through, because the images I somehow misplaced, my apologies. The buttercream is going to be that nice light yellow color with a dark brown disc. We've got the Copper Queen. This is an interesting one because it's your regular orangey golden color, but then the center almost has like red speckles on it that kind of fade in, pretty nice. Gold Rush is your standard orange flower with dark disc. And actually, this here is the Monet's palette. So now we're going to talk about planting these. With the sunflowers, direct sow is definitely the way to go. I did note on here, some people would like to transplant these out. If you're going to transplant them and you're starting them indoors, 2 to 4 weeks at the most. Anything beyond that and you'll really prohibit the blooming on them, or the height will be really off on you. So highly recommend direct sowing these. When I farmed, I regularly use earthway cedar, so I've got some details here for you on that. Including, like, I've used the beet plate, the cucumber plate, and the popcorn plate, depending on what spacing I'm looking for and which varieties I'm doing. So soil temperatures for planting outside, most people recommend planting right around last frost date. I always kind of went in a week before. There are some reports out there that sunflowers could germinate at 50 degrees soil temperature, but if it's too wet, they're just going to rot on you. So most people are doing around 70 degrees or recommending around 70 degrees, but if you go in a week before, you have a little bit of a risk that they may not produce or they may not germinate. But right after that last frost date, you're good to go through the end of the season. Most of these varieties you're going to want a succession plant. So you're going to want to plant every 7 to 10 days for direct sow items. For any single stem items. And for the branching, you can space that out more 20 to 24 days. Planting depth, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch is what we recommend for most of the varieties. The larger, like the mammoth, the hedge types, those you can go a little deeper on because they are a bit larger seed. So half an inch to an inch deep will work for you. Days to germ 4 to 8. Big things to keep in mind when sowing sunflowers, especially birds love them. So something you got to keep an eye on. If you're out there 10 days later and you don't see any germination, definitely take a look. See if the seed is still there or if the birds came behind you and chose it for dinner. I've seen that plenty of times when I farmed. Some people will try to have a spot separate from the sunflowers that they put some sort of feed to try to keep the birds away. Some people will try different sprays and lots of different techniques to try to keep the birds away. We have this chart available on our website as far as the plants per acre, and this is all in the catalog as well. So it can help you if you're planning how far apart you're going to go in the row, which I had mentioned before. You're with a lot of the directs or the single stem items, so 4 to 9 inches in the row, and then the branching varieties 12 to 24 inches in the row. But this chart here helps you decide based on what your space is between the rows, how many plants you would need, in this case for an acre, but you can calculate that out for the space you're trying to do. Here I'll talk about pinching. So pinching is when you remove the main growing point, the apical meristem, off of the plant. So with the branching sunflowers, and we'll also talk about that with zinnias and amaranthus. Pinching that, like for the sunflower purposes, at around 12 inches will help the lower branches start to produce, so that instead of you getting one large head, really tall large head, and then you get some shorter stems coming out, when you pinch it, you're going to start the branching. So you're going to get multiple heads at once that will produce, but they'll be on longer stems. And feel free to ask questions if that didn't fully answer what you were looking for. Cool. Recommendations for harvesting. I'm going to play a quick video for you. Okay, so the interesting thing with that, so again, as I mentioned in the video, cutting when the petals of the ray flowers are just beginning to open, that's going to give you the longest vase life, and they will continue to open whether or not you have them in a cooler. In a cooler, they can hold for you. Many of you, if you're doing U-cut, you're going to find your customers are less likely to harvest in that stage, which kind of is good for you. It means you'll have flowers lasting longer. Most consumers, they are looking for that big head wide open. Unfortunately, it won't last as long in the vase for them, but keep that in mind. If you are doing any harvesting of your own flowers, definitely recommend earlier in the day if possible, or making sure that you do water well the night before or the day before for watering, so that they take up the water, and then when you're harvesting, they hold well. That'll prevent any weak necks of the blooms pointing down. Cut into plain water, strip the leaves, as I pictured there, I go through and I cut the leaves off first, leaving 1 or 2 sets up towards the top. Some people will do that with their hands. Highly recommend wearing gloves. It will eat at your hands pretty well. Doing that, some will cut and then remove all the leaves. So you kind of just got to see what works in your farm and who's harvesting and how that works for you. So after you've harvested into the cool water, transfer to a holding solution. So there's preservative out there, there's holding solution, and then the option of just plain water. If you don't want to do holding solution, that is fine. It does extend the vase life a little bit longer, about 4 days longer actually. But I've seen plenty of people who just cut into plain water and then leave them in that, or leave them in plain water. Definitely do not use hydrators or floral food. Those are two with sunflowers specifically that it does shorten the bloom time in the vase. So keep that in mind. Everything else, or if you go to a florist, most of the time they come with the packet. If you have sunflowers, do not use the packet. It's my recommendation. Sunflowers are what we kind of call like a dirty flower stem. They're hairy, kind of gross, which means that in the water, they're going to be releasing a lot of stuff and getting in lots of bacteria. So definitely change your water daily. Sunflowers drink a lot of water, so you got to make sure the water does not run out. Definitely make sure you're disinfecting your buckets between each use. Dirty buckets will shorten the vase life, as well as I hear a lot from people about getting weak necks, again, where the sunflower head starts off like this, and then by the end it's just droopy. If you're not cleaning your buckets, you definitely will get that, so keep that in mind. Generally speaking, 7 to 14 days for the vase life, depending on how you're treating them and when you're harvesting. Okay, zinnias. Zinnias are a good one. A lot of people know these. Whether or not you're just starting or you have a little more experience, these are good for you. There's lots of options. We have many varieties. Today, again, I'm going to talk to you about some of the more economical priced items to get you started. And then if you want to move on to the higher quality, we have products for that as well. These add great texture to bouquets. I know people who just sell bouquets of these on their farm stand, and they do quite well. So again, I'm going to go through all the varieties we have here to offer, and we've got quite the mix. So the peppermint stick mix is what we've got on top here. So this has speckles, so it's the pale yellow, pink, orange, some cherry red streaks. And it is stuck, my apologies. Apologies for that. This one here is Fruity Beauty. So in the marketplace, you'll hear of a series called the Dahlia Flowered. And we've got the Dahlia Flowered, and then that we have some of the single color mixes on, and the Magnificent Mix. So Magnificent Mix is going to be a little bit larger than these Dahlia types, but not as doubled. So again, the Magnificent Mix there. I'm going to sneak back. Sorry about that, guys. So this is the Fruity Beauty. Here we've got the Strawberry Parfait Mix. the Blushing Bride, the Berry Tart. Here's the Magnificent Mix for you. And then our number one seller on these mixes is the State Fair Mix. So these are ones people are used to referring to as cut and come again. So with the zinnias, you get them in, you can pinch them when you get that first bloom, or deadhead as some people would refer to at that point. And that's gonna, again, similar to the sunflowers we talked about, that's gonna get the branching going and get you more cuts on taller stems quicker. So any of these we talk about in the zinnias, you will be producing throughout the season on. So it's not a one flower and done. So they'll be blooming from early summer all the way to frost. Keep in mind with some of the zinnias, especially some of the more economical ones, and even some of the more expensive ones, they all do potentially succumb to powdery mildew. I highly recommend 2 or 3 successions of these. So succession is when so we do one right at last frost, one planting right at last frost, one a month later, and then if your zone allows, do another one a month later, so that you're consistently getting new plants. Another way to fight off powdery mildew or extend it so that it doesn't kick into later in the season is to have more spacing between your plants. Make sure you have good airflow. The tighter your plants are, the more likely you're going to have bacterial issues. So moving away from the dahlia types, we do have semi-double, double quill type chrysanthemum mix, which we picked up this year. These are quite large. They're very, very nice and a unique looking bloom. And more dahlia types, but these are mostly almost all double, where the others that we talked about before are semi-double to double. These will consistently be double blooms for you. Macarania, this has that unique reddy orange color mix. And then we've got the pink and white with the Mazurkia. And then the Oklahoma series, this is a nice double bloom, but it's a smaller bloom. So still an economical price point, but consistently double. Great variety or a great series. We offer single colors as well on these. Similar to sunflowers, highly recommend direct sowing these if you have weed issues or you want to get them in early. You can transplant these out. I wouldn't go any more than 6 weeks on these. 4 weeks would probably be better recommended, but some people will do 6. Soil temperature is 70 degrees. So these definitely wait to plant out or direct sow until your average last frost. About a 1/4 inch deep on these, 5 to 10 days of germ on them. And your spacing on these, you can do 9 to 12 inches. Some people will do a little more. Keep that in mind. So this is in your row. If you are doing 2 rows right next to each other, you might want to go more to the 12-inch versus the 9. Again, for that good airflow, but keep that in mind. Recommendations for harvesting, best face life. I'm going to play a quick video for you. That was a video we took through one of our walkthroughs with our sales team to kind of just talk through the products we had here on our site. So as I mentioned in the video, do a wiggle test. As you wiggle the stem back and forth, if the head gets floppy and is going like this, then it's not ready. If it holds well and just goes with the stem, it's ready to be harvested. Generally speaking, it's ready when it's at that stage is when pollen is just before pollen is visible, which is the ideal time to harvest it. So you're going to have a longer vase life on it. These again, you'll put into plain water when you are harvesting, removing the leaves. These are not as hardy as the sunflowers, where I was going and with the knife and hacking at the sunflowers. Zinnias cannot handle that. So you definitely will need clippers or some sort of sharp knife, and be careful when harvesting because you can easily break the tip of the stem. Preservative is great on these. It does extend the vase life. If you have coolers and you're used to keeping any flowers that you do harvest in them, not recommended on the zinnias. Many people do have issues with that. Some people have success, but for the most part, I highly recommend do not put them in a cooler. Similar to sunflowers, check your water regularly, big drinkers. These aren't as dirty of a stem as the sunflowers are, but keep your buckets clean, change and check the water daily. Vase life on these is 5 to 10 days. Amaranthus. So we do have a few different types of amaranthus. Actually, forgive me. While we're here, actually, I'm going to go back to zinnias. What I didn't mention is we do have some higher end varieties that are available on our website, more unique colors. The Benares Giant is our #1 series. They're a much larger head, but again, they're not your economical price point. They're what florist quality, or when you think of florist quality, what you would think of, that nice large head, consistently double. So Benares Giant are available on our website. We've got the Queenie series, which again is a nice doubling dahlia type, unique antique colors. Oklahoma, I mentioned, kind of fits in those, but it is more economical just because of the price point, because of the bloom size. So they fit in there well. And then we've got Uproar Rose, which is similar to Benares Giant, but right from the get-go has big double blooms, gorgeous. And then Zowie Yellow Flame is another unique color. So check those out on our website if you're looking to move on to the next stage and want some unique colors and varieties. Okay, Amaranthus. So Amaranthus is another direct sell item. This is one that I think is great for making a quick bouquet with 1 sunflower or 2 sunflowers and a couple Amaranthus. Something good for farm stands, and there's not a lot of design needed on it. So something nice and quick. We've got a few varieties here. The Green Thumb, which is upright green. Hot Biscuits, one of my favorite, very unique color, and goes great with sunflowers and zinnias. The Oshberg, this is more like an eggplant purple color. Pygmy Touch is going to be a little more red, a little less purple in it. Red Cathedral is that old one that many people are familiar with. We do not offer the green one at this time, but we have the red one. So with all of those, keep in mind, as we talked about pinching before, pinching at 8 to 9 inches on these will change the habit of the plant and give you smaller plumes, depending, and more harvest over the season. So that's something to keep in mind depending on your production, what market, is it you cut, all of the stuff we've talked about throughout. Something you can keep in mind to trial alongside. It may be worth, with many of these items on the pinching side, to do a row, 1 row unpinched and 1 row pinched, just so you see the difference, because they do produce very different plumes. So on these, another one, direct sow after last frost, 70-degree soil temperature. These don't need to go as deep, so 1/8 of an inch, 7 to 10 days to germ. And then the planting space on these is 6 to 9 inches. Again, if you're pinching like the Cathedral, some of those really large ones, you may want to space out a little more due to 12 inches. But for the most part, 6 to 9 inches will work on these. Harvesting on these, you're going to cut when 75% of the flowers on the inflorescence are open. So sometimes it's hard to really tell on these because it's not like a big flower that's going to pop out. Really what you want to do is harvest them before they're starting to set seed. That's most important. These cutting into plain water, these do well with preservatives, so go ahead and use that in your buckets. Again, similar to the others we talked about, check water regularly, make sure your buckets are clean, change the water daily, and you should expect 7 to 10 days on these, sometimes much longer. And I know I repeated the disinfect buckets between usage on every single variety we're talking about, but that's really important. Probably the number one issue when people are having post-harvest problems. So keep those in mind. Cool. And now it looks like we've got a bunch of questions. We'll go into that and then see.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Christine.
Thank you so much for going through all of that with us. We do have a couple of different questions. Lisa wrote in and she's wondering what size or depth inserts or plug trays you would suggest she use for her zinnias.
Many people are doing 72, the 72 trays on those. Anything with a smaller cell will be too small for them.
And in the same line along with the zinnias, if using a seeder, do you know what plate size you would recommend for seeding zinnias or amaranthus? Or is that something that we can gather the information and provide to the customer after this webinar?
That we can do, and we will try to get that updated on the website as well. I know I've got the details on Earthway cedar. I don't on some of the others, but I know beet is pretty common for the amaranthus. And I can follow up. Again, we can follow up with more details or even add it onto the presentation before we load it.
And Linda's wondering if there are certain types of preservatives that are better to use for specific varieties of flowers. Is there something you've used when you were farming that you found to be the most efficient?
Floralife and the, I always say it wrong, Chrysal. I used both and never had issues with either. They're pretty consistent and great preservatives. Again, those are the two that I'm familiar with. Floralife, I know we offer the packets of it. That's what I've reliably supplied my customers with as well. So.
Is there a specific bucket variety that you used when you were farming?
For buckets, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I used Harris Seeds buckets, all the buckets left over here. So as far as just cutting into buckets, as far as if you're looking for display purposes, I know us as well as many other people sell like the black buckets that you can get. Not to cut off the buying piece of it, but Valentine's Day, I saw on a bunch of the social media groups, everybody talking about going to grocery stores, and as they bring in lots of flowers and they throw away the buckets at the end. So the nice black buckets are available from many grocery stores, or even some florists will have them that they're trying to get rid of. So that's what a lot of farmers will do, is go around to people like that and see what they can access. Otherwise, you can find through wholesale floral groups buckets as well.
And for some of these, the Floralife, and for some of the cut flower display options, if you check on our website and our supplies, you'll find that we do have a couple different options for customers to look at. So you may find something there that we have that will suit your needs. Leanne wrote in and she planted some amaranthus last year and they reseeded everywhere. And she's wondering if there is any way to stop them from taking over other than harvesting the flower heads. Is there anything that you found that was useful when you were farming?
The number one is harvest before they set seed. Like that's really the reliable way. You can start plucking now. I'm sure there'll be more seed underneath if you do any moving of that soil, unfortunately. So that's why it's highly recommended that you harvest before, or even if you just got to go out there and just chop them. If they're getting ahead of you, chop. The good and the bad of them. The bad
Right.
for us is they will reseed for you. So definitely keep on top of them with harvesting.
They are prolific producers. Frank wrote in and he's wondering when you would recommend that he pinch his zinnias.
Zinnias usually between 9 and 12 inches.
We have a couple of different questions regarding types of fertilizers to use during the growing season. Do you think that it's necessary to apply fertilizer during the growing season to your cut flowers?
Definitely. Many people will go in and give a big boost right at the beginning and then midway through the season give a second hit. I tried to be consistent in every couple of weeks, adding in when I farmed. Honestly, you can keep right in line with many of your vegetable production. That because many of you, I mean, all of you are growing vegetables already, I would say stick right in line. They don't need high fertility, but they do need good fertility.
Okay. As far as sunflowers go, do you think that it's possible to start some of those in lower tunnels for that season extension? For some of the shorter varieties, I'm sure that would be possible.
Really, any of these you can do. Likely, they're not going to be as tall anyway, just because of the amount of light and the temperatures. So they're referred to as being day length neutral, but really it comes down to the cold temperatures limit the height on them. So that's why a lot of people will not produce them earlier on. But if you're getting at least 24 inches, you're probably not carrying. So I'd say give it a go. I know plenty of people who do them under row covers, at least to get them started. And once it's warm enough, pop them off. Or if you're doing caterpillar tunnels, something like that, then it's a little easier for if they do get much taller. But
and would you recommend drip irrigation for sunflowers? And can you touch a little bit on why we would recommend the drip over say something like the overhead irrigation?
most, not even just sunflowers, most cuts, I would highly recommend drip. Anytime you're getting water on top of the leaves, anytime you're getting the water, especially on top of the flowers, you're going to cause speckling, potential other issues. You're more likely to have some bacterial issues. So I highly recommend drip. Again, vegetable farmers, many of you probably are used to using the drip, so an easy add-on. I know when I started farming, I did not have drip, so I was running around with a hose, which is always fun. But definitely, I wouldn't recommend watering from above.
And I'm sure you mentioned this earlier, but can you just tell us one more time what the spacing is that you recommend for those branch sunflowers, both in row and in between row?
So at least 12 to 24 inch in the row, and then it's really the spacing between the row comes down to what you're planting with. Honestly, you could do 2 rows right next to each other if you're planter or you're hand sowing them, or a jab plant using a jab planter. But 12 to 24 inches on the branching.
And would you suggest that you harvest the sunflowers when they just start to open? What's the best timing so that you can have that really beautiful flower for the bouquets?
Yeah, so as I had shown the one video, so as the ray flowers are just starting to pick up off of the disc is when you would want to harvest on those. That's going to give you the longest vase life.
And do you know what temperature is best for storing the bouquets so that they last the longest? We had a specific question about temperature for long-lasting bouquets.
I'm trying to remember what florist coolers usually are at. I know around 40 degrees, but I can't remember where, depending on how tropical you get of flowers and up, it changes from there, but 40 is what I'm familiar with.
And for people who are growing in some of the colder zones, are plugs a good option for them to have that longer season so they can get the bouquets and the flowers? Or, if they have access to a greenhouse, can they start some of these indoors so that they are really making the most of the limited season that they have?
You can start ahead. Again, all three of these do not do well with a lot of root disturbance. So if you are going to start them ahead, make sure that you have a good amount of soil in there, and you're not messing with the root base too much. But again, most of these people can just do on a light stand. Again, depending on how large your production is, just an easy light stand. If you're only doing 2 to 6 weeks, depending on which crop we're talking about, because they're quick and out. So.
And are ethylene inhibitors okay to use with the sunflowers, with the water that you're using to hold those bouquets?
Yes. That brings up a good point for anybody who is storing in coolers. Because you are vegetable producers, keep in mind having the flowers in with your vegetables will cause them to have shorter vase life. So if you have the ability to have separate coolers, or somehow keeping it sectioned off, that really only helps if you have the plastic sheeting and stuff. But that will affect the vase life.
In your experience, we have a question from Randy, who's concerned about dirty water with his sunflowers and how can he create bouquets without contaminating and affecting the vase life of some of those other flowers in the bouquet.
Change the water. Changing water regularly is the important piece. Also using the holding solution. That's one that is okay on sunflowers. Again, the hydrators and the preservative tend to make the vase life shorter on sunflowers. But if you're using a holding solution, that will help, along with the other varieties.
For the sunflowers and the zinnias, how would you recommend that someone plant those in the plastic mulch? Direct sow for some of these?
Another example, I've seen both. I've seen people go through in the plastic mulch and use a jab planter, which if you're not familiar with, is kind of just like a plastic pipe with, you just drop the seed down in it. There's different versions of them. Or you could do transplants, as we had talked about, again, making sure that they're not in the trays for too long, but you can transplant into the plastic mulch as well.
Should our customers sterilize the buckets that they're using for their bouquets in between harvests?
Definitely. Again, that's the number one. I always annoy people, like even on my farm, I annoyed people that would help me out, because keeping the buckets clean, it can be a pain. It is not fun to do, but it is really, really important for vase life.
And Tracy's wondering if we have a resource in either our catalogs or online that will help guide her on which varieties to use, that she might be able to resource for a wedding that she's having at the end of May. I know that we have a couple of days to maturity charts within our catalog.
Yeah, so this is the catalog from Harris Seeds. This is our vegetable and cut flower catalog. So in here, right at the beginning of our cut flower section, we've got a quick chart that kind of goes through all the genera, and it has days to harvest, post-harvest, but really going through the catalog, each variety showcases the days to harvest. The thing I would recommend for anybody who's aiming for a wedding, especially, or events, with any crop, but especially if you're doing sunflowers, any of the single stem or anything, where you make sure you aim for the week before, the week of, and the week after is kind of the rule I've always went with, so that you know you're going to actually have flowers on time. If you just aim for that 1 week, or just one planting for that week, it's a big risk. So
Wonderful. Do you have any suggestions for keeping black caterpillars off of your zinnias? Is there a specific spray that you might recommend?
I don't do much in spray recommendations because every state is very different, and I don't have a lot of experience with that. Luckily, when I farmed, I didn't see much of that on the zinnias, good old Japanese beetles, but other than that, I didn't have too many issues. Again, we highly recommend getting in touch with cooperative extensions in your area, or the different groups like that. They really know the best for your location, and what the actual, like, based on the insects in your area and how to best handle it.
And we have a question from Beth in regards to disinfecting and sterilizing the buckets. What did you use to sterilize buckets?
I just a little bit of bleach, but there's other options out there for sterilizing that florists use. So a low concentration of bleach and really good scrubbing. Unfortunately, with the zinnia or with the sunflowers being such a dirty stem, you really got to scrub the buckets. So, but yeah.
So we have a question from Janelle, and I don't know if you can answer this fully or if this is something that, you know, we'll have to, again, take some time to answer afterwards, but what length of stem are you harvesting your flowers at for bouquets? Is that dependent on the variety?
Honestly, it's dependent on your market and what you're doing. So are you doing 6-inch bouquets? Are you doing really tall, like you want a 2-foot tall bouquet? Most people, like if you're harvesting sunflowers at 2 to 3 feet, most people are cutting that stem off by the time it makes it into a bouquet or a bunch. Again, as I mentioned, it comes down to your market. I know when I was doing the specialty cuts, I had celosia heads that were huge, and the stem was only this, and I had florists that would take it because with the vase, with the arrangements they were happened to be doing that week, they would work because they just needed something short and big. So it really comes down to your market. If you're doing U-cut, my guess is most people, when they go in and harvest, are probably going to just be harvesting 12, maybe 15 inches of stem. They're not going to be doing even a full 24 inches. Keeping in mind some of the zinnias especially, or any of the branching stuff, as it branches, the plant is going to tell you how long the stem can be. So you just harvest back to the main stem. Sometimes you have, if you need that bloom and you need a longer stem, sometimes you have to take off some of the main stem as well. But for mostly, I think what this presentation is geared for, I think just following the plant's habit will do what you need.
And Michael, will pinching zinnias affect the bloom time, especially if you're looking for those early blooms?
Definitely. It will delay. So I recommend going, like, if you have 2 rows next to each other, do 1 row pinched and 1 not. What it will do is it'll expedite, pinching it will expedite you having more blooms earlier. Not pinching will give you, again, 1 bloom earlier. So it's kind of that balance of what you're looking for. So if you're just looking to hit a date and you need just a few blooms, not pinching will give you a bloom quicker. The one thing with zinnias, especially some of the more economical varieties, if you're looking for that full double bloom, you're probably not going to get it on the first bloom. So with those, I would recommend pinching. That way you're more likely to get good doubling and less of that single open bloom. That's where, like, the Benares Giant, the Uproar Rose, those are more reliable with putting out big full double blooms right at the beginning.
And Michael, we have a couple of different people who have written in. Can you explain what the difference is between a holding solution and a preservative?
The quick answer, because I would need to dig a bit deeper into it, is so preservative does have some sugar in it. So the preservative is going to actually, so preservative is more like a food. So it's going to, I don't know what the actual additives are that make them different, other than knowing that there's more sugars in the preservative. However, the preservative isn't going to stop it from like continuing, stopping the bloom to continue to its process. The holding is going to basically put it at a halt so that it doesn't keep opening.
And can you provide an example of what a holding solution is?
But both Chrysal and no, I just forgot the other name. Sorry. Both brands, or Floralife and Chrysal, they both offer holding solutions. Right now, we do not offer any of that. But both of those brands offer them into the florist trade. On that note, another thing that I didn't mention throughout is Quick Dip is something that is used. It's the one we have is from Floralife. That is something some people will use on all three of these crops. It just helps them hydrate quickly. So that's something you can look into. Again, sunflowers, I said all three, sorry. Excluding the sunflowers, do not use the Quick Dip on the sunflowers, but the rest use Quick Dip on, and it'll help them absorb and hydrate better. I think that answered it, sorry.
That's great. That's a lot of information. Thank you. We have a customer who wrote in, they've lost multiple crops of sunflowers due to rodents. They would prefer to stay organic. Do you have any tips or tricks that you have used that you found helpful?
Not, unfortunately, not really. No easy sprays, that's for sure. Like there's, Christine, you could probably answer this one. Christine's our trials manager, so she's more likely to have to deal with the rodents and stuff, but there's not an easy answer, unfortunately, whether it's vegetables or flowers.
Traps are helpful, and being willing to bite the bullet and stomp them out when you see them running through the beds. But unfortunately, where there are seeds, there will be rodents.
There is, I forget, there's a flower farmer I know, and I'm forgetting the name of her farm right now because I'm skilled like that. But she put in like I forget what they're called. Christine would probably be able to give the actual terminology, but like one of those really tall poles for a hawk to sit on. Like yep. There's a lot of farmers who will go through that process. It sounds dumb, but it actually works. Again, it won't eliminate all of your pest issues, but there's stuff like that you can think about that's a little outside of the box, because many times we just think about what spray can we put down, what traps can we put out. So that is an alternative.
Yep, that's a good point. That will also help with some of the bird damage. A lot of times having that owl or hawk figure will, deter some of the smaller birds from coming in and damaging your crops. That's a good point.
Or get a dog or a cat that hangs out in your field.
Have a couple of pets out there. For keeping your flowers weed-free, do you recommend using plastic mulch or some of the fabric as a go-to option for that, rather than relying on sprays and constantly stirrup-hoeing and weeding?
Definitely. Wherever you can, I always used as much as I could. Some of the direct sow, when I wanted to get large plant, like sunflowers I didn't tend to have as much issue with, and many people don't, because they actually have a natural inhibitor within them that will inhibit other stuff around them from germinating to a certain point. Like stuff will still germinate, but it slows down other items. So usually sunflowers, because they're such large leaves, once they get going, they can outcompete the weeds. I say that, and there's still, it also depends on what weeds you're dealing with. So, but definitely if you can do plastic mulch or row covers or something in that nature, do it.
How many blooms can we expect from each zinnia plant? And is there anything that the growers can do to increase the number of blooms that they're getting?
That's a tough one. I'm going to say it all comes down to so coming back to some of the fertility questions. So good fertility. With that being said, you definitely, as farmers, whether it's vegetables or flowers, make sure you're doing soil tests to find out what nutrients are in your soil, what you need to be adding, check your pH, all that type of stuff. If they're stressed, they're not going to put out many blooms. The happier they are, the more blooms you're going to get. Again, keep up on the watering, have good fertility. None of these are heavy feeders, so they don't need super high. I feel like I kind of went around the actual answer of the numbers. It's a tough one. It could be 10 to 20, and in certain areas, in other areas, it could be 30 to 40. So it really comes down to where you're located, how long your season is, and how well you're maintaining them.
We have a couple of personal questions. I don't know if you have time for that, but can you discuss your career path at all? Some of our viewers are interested in how you got to where you are today.
Well, this is a fun one. So I grew up on a blueberry farm, and went to in high school, we had a work program where it was called BOCES. But it basically teaches you different occupations. And I went there because my friend was going, and it was a conservation program. I ended up doing the greenhouse because nobody wanted to do it. And my professor, I became really good friends with because I was the only one in the greenhouse program, and that was her love. Went out on maternity leave. We had an event we needed to do flowers for. So she ordered me flowers, called me, sent me pictures and said, "You're designing for this, here you go." And then I fell in love with flowers from that moment. I haven't left the industry. I've always had my hands in flowers in some respect. So then I went from high school, I worked in garden centers at that point, and then went to Morrisville State, southeast of Syracuse, for horticulture, got an associate's, and then worked in and around retail florists, wholesale florists, and then found actually with Harris, I started off in the sales team. So I was on the sales team for 5 seasons, moved into web marketing for a couple, went away from my farm for a couple of years, which I was also farming when I was at Harris. Went away, farmed for a couple more years, worked at a florist while I was farming as well, and then got the call for this position and came back. So it's kind of, I just kept my feet in the flower world as much as I can. So,
I mean, it's good to know that there are a lot of options for people who are passionate about agriculture, and that can look different for different time periods of your life.
I never thought I'd work at a seed company. I never had the idea that a seed company is a job. I don't know. So, yeah.
It does look like we still have a couple of questions that are coming through. I am having a hard time accessing the rest of the questions. So, if you see anything that you can answer easily, Michael, please do so. Otherwise, we can absolutely answer some of these questions after the fact, and we can post those answers when we upload this online.
Well, I'll take a look real quick. Beth asked, is there a good market for pollen? Sunflowers that contain pollen for folks who are pro-pollinator or are most more concerned about pollen dropping on white tablecloths. Again, I think this comes down to your market. For most farms, most vegetable farms, just adding on flowers, I think it's a nice little perk playing into the pro-pollinator, especially you need pollinators for your veggies. When it comes to floral quality for florists, it can be more of a problem only because once they're pollinated, any flowers that are pollinated are going to have less of a vase life. So really the pollen-free part of it is having pretty white tablecloths, vase life. I hope that answered that piece.
And do you have any suggestions for keeping deer from eating sunflowers? I mean, if you have the option, electric fence is always great.
Good luck. Give them something else good to eat, really, is what, it's a tough one. I lucked out both of my fields. We had plenty of deer for some reason. A couple times a season, they'd come and munch on some sunflowers. But I hear people who have their entire sunflower field eaten by deer. So I don't have an easy answer for that.
And do you have any experience using flame weeders as an option for weed control if people are not using plastic mulch or fabric?
I have, you just got to get in young, get in when the plants are quite young. Or that, not the plants, but the weeds are quite young.
Okay. And I know that on our website, as well as on our seed packets, we do offer some information on the growing and culture requirements for our specific flowers. Is that information available in the catalog for soil pH, or can they find that online somewhere?
Currently, we don't have any of the pH information on our website or in our catalogs. Honestly, I use a lot of our breeding companies' websites for the full details because each variety can be different. You can reach out to us on some of that. The biggest thing I always do, and my go-to will be if I'm looking at Sunfinity sunflower, I will Google Sunfinity sunflower culture. And usually within the top couple will be the breeding company's culture sheets for that. Again, that really helps with getting down to the detail on pH, any of that type of stuff. Because again, some of it comes down to the genus, some of it comes down to the species, and sometimes all the way down to the variety being slightly different. So.
And that's a great point, Michael. We're always welcome to field questions from our customers. You can reach out to us online, you can call us, and anything that we can't answer in the moment, we will do the research and get back to you. So please feel free to use those resources that you have available, and we will absolutely help wherever we can.
I do have a couple more of these that can be quick answers. The flowers on the Sunfinity are great as a cut. Again, they do, many times they contain pollen, sometimes they do not. But you're looking at probably 3 to 4 inch bloom, sometimes a little big. Again, that comes down to fertility and water on how big those will be. Chris asked about if any of these varieties have better holding ability for the petals. One thing to keep in mind, especially if you're looking to go at a higher quality, the Sunrich series, the Vincent series, and there's a few others as well, but they have more than 2 layers of petals. So if one petal drops, it's not as noticeable. Some of the older breeding, just it's a single layer of petals. If you drop, you're done. With that in mind, North Carolina State University, they do a lot of cut flower trials, and they've done them for many, many years. That's my go-to resource on researching some varieties and how well they hold, because they actually do holding trials. And they're the team that puts a lot of the information out relative to what needs a hydrator, what needs a holding solution, what does well with the preservative. All of that I get from North Carolina State. They have great resources, and you can just find their website online. The other thing with sunflowers to keep in mind for petal drop, any of the unique colors, the bicolors, any of those, they are going to drop quicker than your regular orange colors. That's just part of the beast, unfortunately.
So I think that any other questions that our customers want to submit, we can take some time and answer them before we post the video online. But Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to present all of this information to us. You've given these growers a huge step up with information. This has been amazing.
Thank you, everybody.